Rachel speaking with another flight attendant, look at him. Does he really look like a first-class passenger, with a look of disdain and disrespectful words? They had no idea who they were dealing with. When a flight attendant forced a black family out of first class, it seemed like just another act of casual bias. But moments later, the truth came out, this family didn't just buy tickets, they owned the entire airline. And what happened next? It changed everything. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. The boarding gate at Denver International buzzed with activity as travelers rushed to board Flight 1643 bound for San Diego. Among them was a poised family of 3: Marcus Whitman, his wife Adriana, and their 5-year-old son, Caleb. Marcus, dressed in a custom-tailored navy blue suit, held a sleek leather briefcase in one hand. His demeanor exuded quiet authority. Adriana, elegant in a flowing ivory dress, gently held Caleb's hand as he skipped beside her, giggling. The family was heading out on a much-needed vacation, a small reprieve from their high-powered lives and packed calendars. As they stepped into the first-class cabin, the polished interiors shimmered under the warm ambient lights. The air smelled faintly of fresh leather and citrus-scented disinfectant. Marcus glanced at the seat numbers engraved in brass along the overhead bins and gave a slight nod. Right here, he said to Adriana, motioning toward a pair of spacious leather seats in row 2. Passengers nearby offered polite smiles and nods as the Whitmans settled in. Adriana lifted Caleb onto his seat, buckling him in before handing him a small light-up toy airplane. The boy's face lit up with excitement. Meanwhile, Marcus stowed their carry-ons in the overhead compartment. From across the cabin, a flight attendant named Rachel Dunning watched them. Her eyes scanned the family with subtle disapproval. Adjusting the sleeves of her crisp airline blazer, Rachel walked briskly toward their row. Her smile was tight, practiced, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me," Rachel said, her tone laced with an odd edge of formality. She directed her gaze at Marcus. "May I see your boarding passes?" Marcus turned, unfazed. "Of course," he replied, his voice calm and professional. He retrieved the boarding passes from his inner jacket pocket and handed them over. Adriana looked up from helping Caleb adjust his seatbelt, sensing a tension in the air. Caleb remained blissfully unaware, absorbed in making his toy airplane zoom through imaginary skies. Rachel took the boarding passes and inspected them carefully, a crease forming between her brows. She held them for several seconds too long, checking and rechecking the names and seat numbers. "First class?" she asked, voice faltering slightly as if the words were somehow difficult to believe. Marcus nodded without hesitation. "Yes. These are our seats." His tone remained neutral, but Adriana noticed the way his jaw tightened slightly. Rachel hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "I need to verify something with the gate agent." "Please remain seated," she added curtly, turning on her heel and disappearing behind the partition leading to the galley. Marcus returned to his seat slowly, his face unreadable. "What was that?" Adriana whispered, her voice low but tight with concern. "Probably just a routine check," Marcus replied, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. But the way his fingers flexed slightly betrayed a deeper irritation. "Don't worry about it." In the galley, Rachel lifted the receiver of the wall-mounted phone, dialing the gate desk with urgency. "I've got a situation," she said in a hushed tone. "There's a family in first class, a black couple and a child. I'm not sure their tickets are valid. Can you check their booking?" Marcus and Adriana Whitman. On the other end, the gate agent sounded confused. "Their tickets were confirmed weeks ago. First class. Fully paid. What's the issue?" Rachel paused, chewing her lip. "No issue," she muttered before hanging up. But instead of returning with an apology, she squared her shoulders, adjusted her name tag, and walked back into the first-class cabin with renewed determination. She approached their row again. "I'm sorry, but I need you to step aside for a moment. There seems to be an issue with your reservation. Adriana frowned. What kind of issue? Rachel avoided eye contact. I'll need to speak with you privately, she told Marcus, motioning toward the galley. Marcus stood, his movements slow and deliberate. Adriana, stay with Caleb, he said gently. Passengers nearby began whispering, sensing that something out of the ordinary was unfolding. Caleb tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mommy, is Daddy in trouble? No, baby, Adriana said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He's just fixing something. Behind the curtain, in the galley, Marcus stood tall, exuding composure even as tension simmered beneath the surface. Rachel fumbled slightly with her words. Sir, there appears to be a flag on your reservation. It's, standard procedure to follow up on these things. Flagged? Marcus raised an eyebrow. I booked these seats over a month ago. What exactly is the problem? Rachel's arms folded instinctively. It's not about payment, she said defensively. It's just, first class is a premium cabin. We have to ensure all seats are allocated properly. Marcus stared at her, disbelief creeping across his face. Premium cabin, he repeated slowly. Are you implying we don't belong here? Rachel blinked, caught off guard. Of course not, she said, her tone suddenly sharp. I just need to follow protocol. Marcus inhaled deeply, maintaining his composure. Let's resolve this quickly. My family is waiting. Back in the cabin, Adriana sat tense, her hand tightly gripping Caleb's. A middle-aged man across the aisle leaned over and whispered, "Everything okay?" She offered a strained smile. Just a mix-up, I think. In the galley, Rachel was now speaking with another flight attendant, Jessica, younger and newer to the airline. Jessica raised an eyebrow. Did you check their reservation? Yes, Rachel replied. But, look at him. Does he really look like a first-class passenger? Jessica's expression hardened. You can't judge people by how they look, she said firmly. If their ticket is valid, that's all that matters. But Rachel brushed past her and returned to Marcus. Sir, she said with authority. I'm going to have to ask you and your family to move to the main cabin until we sort this out. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but edged with steel. On what grounds? Protocol, she said again, avoiding his eyes. If you're suggesting we move, I want a valid reason, he replied. Because right now, it feels like you're acting on something other than airline policy. She opened her mouth to respond, but a chime interrupted an intercom announcement from the captain. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as we finalize some adjustments to ensure your comfort during the flight. Rachel barely heard it. Marcus pulled out his phone and turned away, speaking into it calmly. Is this still a good time? He asked. A pause. Proceed. He hung up and turned back to Rachel, his tone unchanged. Shall we return to my family? Her jaw clenched, but she nodded. As they re-entered the cabin, eyes followed them. The silence was deafening. Adriana's gaze met Marcus's. He gave her a small nod, but she could tell this wasn't over. And somewhere inside her, she knew a storm was about to break. Marcus settled back into his seat beside Adriana and Caleb, his expression calm but unreadable. Adriana offered a silent questioning glance, and he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Caleb smiled up at his father, oblivious to the unease in the air, and returned to playing with his toy airplane. But the tension wasn't gone, not by a long shot. Just minutes later, Rachel returned, this time her face more rigid, her voice tighter than before. Sir, she said, her tone clipped. We've decided it would be best if you and your family relocate to the main cabin until your reservation can be fully verified. Adriana's jaw tightened. Her voice remained measured, but her eyes burned. We paid for these seats. In full. The tickets are valid. What exactly is the issue? Rachel hesitated, clearly rattled. There's been a discrepancy in the system, she insisted. Please cooperate, or I will have to involve security. The murmur of nearby passengers grew louder. A white-haired woman in the third row whispered to her seatmate, "They've been nothing but polite." "What's going on?" A young man across the aisle raised his voice slightly, enough to be heard. "Why are they being singled out? This doesn't look like a mistake." Rachel straightened her shoulders. "I don't want to escalate this," she repeated, her voice sharpening, though the edge in it now felt forced. "Please gather your belongings." Adriana opened her mouth, but Marcus gently raised a hand, signaling her to stay calm. Slowly, he stood, adjusting his blazer with deliberate precision. "If you're involving security," he said with chilling calm, "make sure they come with a written explanation. Otherwise, this will be seen as an arbitrary removal, and I assure you, that won't end well for you." Rachel flinched at the authority in his voice but didn't back down. "Please, sir. Just move. We're trying to avoid a confrontation." Marcus turned to Adriana and Caleb. "It's fine," he said softly, though his tone carried the weight of something far from finished. The family rose and gathered their belongings as passengers watched in stunned silence. Caleb, now noticeably more subdued, clutched his airplane tightly. Adriana held his hand, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. They were guided to the main cabin and assigned seats in a cramped middle row 27, right beside the wing. The contrast with first class was stark: limited space, narrower seats, no personal service. But neither Marcus nor Adriana showed a flicker of reaction. Back in the galley, Rachel leaned against the counter, her palms sweaty. She could hear the murmurs of first-class passengers still buzzing in her ears. "That wasn't right," a man said, loud enough to be heard through the curtain. "They had tickets. Why treat them like that?" Another added, "That's going to backfire." Rachel tried to ignore them as the phone mounted on the galley wall buzzed. She jumped. "This is Rachel," she answered, trying to sound composed. But the voice on the other end was anything but casual. It was the captain. "Miss Dunning," he said, his voice measured and firm. "I've just been contacted by the airline's executive team. A passenger on this flight reached out directly. I need you to explain exactly what's going on." Rachel's blood ran cold. She stumbled through her explanation. "It was just a routine issue. I thought there was a problem with their tickets." There was a long pause on the other end. "No issue has been reported on their booking," the captain said. "You need to handle this very carefully. We cannot afford a situation like this. Tread lightly, Miss Dunning. Until further notice." The line went dead. Rachel stood frozen, her mind spinning. She peeked past the curtain at row 27, where Marcus sat beside his family. He appeared relaxed, almost too relaxed. He wasn't upset. He wasn't panicked. He was waiting. Jessica, her fellow flight attendant, entered the galley just then. She gave Rachel a long, searching look before setting a tray of drinks on the counter. "You need to fix this," she said flatly. Rachel turned, flustered. "I followed procedure." There was a discrepancy. Jessica slammed the tray a little harder than necessary. "Protocol doesn't mean targeting passengers based on assumptions." Rachel bit her lip but said nothing. Before she could reply, the galley phone buzzed again. She picked it up with trembling hands. But this time, it wasn't the captain. It was the airline's executive office. "Miss Dunning," a calm male voice said. "We've received a direct complaint from a passenger on board, Mr. Marcus Whitman. He is one of our primary shareholders. We suggest you look up his file. Immediately." Rachel's breath caught. Her vision blurred for a moment. After the call ended, she turned to the nearest computer terminal and fumbled with the keyboard. When Marcus Whitman's profile appeared, the color drained from her face. Primary shareholder. Executive-level priority status. This wasn't just a well-dressed man with a nice suit. This was a man with real power. Rachel felt her stomach turn. Meanwhile, in row 27, Marcus sat straight-backed, scrolling through his phone with calm precision. Adriana rested her hand on Caleb's shoulder, watching him play with his toy quietly. She looked over at Marcus. "You're awfully quiet," she murmured. He didn't look up. "Not quiet. Just giving them rope." Back in the galley, Rachel stared at the screen in horror. Jessica stepped beside her. "Did you know?" Rachel whispered. Jessica shook her head. "No. But it doesn't matter who he is. You treated them like they didn't belong. Now it looks like you're going to answer for it." Rachel closed her eyes, willing the noise in her head to stop. But it only grew louder. And from the looks of it, the worst was yet to come. The silence in the main cabin was suffocating. Passengers shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves. The tension that had begun as a subtle undercurrent now hung heavy in the air. Back in row 27, Marcus leaned back in his cramped seat, expression calm, fingers moving purposefully over his phone screen. Adriana sat beside him, her posture upright, her gaze fixed forward as if daring the walls of the cabin to blink first. Caleb, too young to fully grasp what had just happened, sat quietly playing with the same toy airplane though even his cheerful mood had dimmed. Suddenly, Rachel emerged from the galley. She moved slowly this time, her steps less sure, her eyes scanning the passengers as if expecting them to recoil. Her usual air of command was gone. Replaced by dread. She approached row 27, her voice lower than anyone had yet heard from her that day. "Mr. Whitman," she began, swallowing hard. "I'd like to apologize for the inconvenience. There seems to have been an error on my part." Marcus turned toward her slowly, his face unreadable. "An error," he repeated, his tone flat. Rachel's throat tightened. I made a mistake in verifying your reservation. I assure you it won't happen again." Adriana turned sharply to face her, her eyes cold, her composure fraying. "You embarrassed my husband. You humiliated my family. In front of a cabin full of strangers. And all because of what? A guess? A gut feeling?" Rachel opened her mouth but said nothing. She stood stiffly as if hoping the floor might just swallow her whole. Marcus placed a gentle hand on Adriana's arm. "It's all right," he said softly. Then he turned back to Rachel, his voice calm but glacial. "I'll handle this directly with your executive team." He paused. "For now, we'll remain where we are." Rachel gave a stiff nod and backed away, her hands trembling, her steps unsteady. The murmurs around the cabin hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown louder. More pointed. Passengers watched her retreat with narrowed eyes. Judgment hung thickly in the air. Jessica met her at the galley, arms folded. "It's not over," she said plainly. "You know that, right?" Rachel didn't respond. She couldn't. Not yet. Minutes later, the phone in the galley buzzed again. Rachel flinched, heart racing. She picked it up slowly, dreading what she might hear. It was the captain. His tone was clipped, no longer hiding the tension. "Miss Dunning, I've just received another call from the executive office. Mr. Whitman's identity has been confirmed. They are not pleased." Rachel closed her eyes. "The instructions are clear," the captain continued. "He and his family are to be reinstated in first class immediately. And you are to personally deliver an apology." Rachel gripped the phone with white knuckles. "Understood," she whispered before the line went dead. Jessica watched from the corner. "You brought this on yourself," she said. "Do the right thing, before it gets worse." Drawing a shaky breath, Rachel adjusted her uniform, wiped her palms against her skirt, and stepped out of the galley. Every step toward row 27 felt like a mile. When she reached the Whitmans again, all conversation stopped. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice barely steady. "On behalf of the airline, I'd like to sincerely apologize for the way your family has been treated. It was an error in judgment, and I take full responsibility." Adriana raised an eyebrow. "Now you realize it was an error?" Her tone was frost itself. Rachel flushed but pressed on. "The executive office has instructed that your family be returned to first class immediately. I will personally ensure that your seats are ready and that there will be no further disruptions." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, he stood. "Adriana," he said calmly. "Caleb. Let's go." Adriana stood without a word, holding her son's hand. Caleb clutched his toy as they walked past Rachel, his little footsteps light but purposeful. First-class passengers glanced up as the family returned, eyes wide with curiosity and something else respect. Rachel busied herself preparing their seats with almost frantic attention to detail. She fluffed the pillows. She placed chilled bottles of sparkling water on the tray tables. She adjusted the seat recliners like her life depended on it. Marcus and Adriana settled in without a word. Caleb returned to his window seat, bouncing slightly, unaware of the storm his presence had helped uncover. "If there's anything else you need," Rachel said, her voice quivering, "please, let me know." Marcus looked at her with a cool nod. "We'll let you know." Rachel backed away like a retreating soldier. The looks she received from the first-class cabin were not kind. In the galley, Jessica shook her head as Rachel returned. "It's not over," she said again. "You know that, right?" This time, Rachel didn't argue. She knew Jessica was right. This wasn't forgiveness. This was only the beginning of her reckoning. The flight carried on as if nothing had happened, but the cabin air felt different, charged, heavy. The whispers had lessened, but the stares lingered. Even as drinks were served and seatbelts clicked, every movement seemed to ripple with unspoken tension. Rachel stood stiffly in the galley, her back to the curtain, hands gripping the counter so hard her knuckles went pale. Her mind was a storm. Every decision, every phrase she'd uttered since the Whitmans had stepped on board now replayed in brutal clarity. Jessica returned with a stack of service trays, her demeanor unchanged. Rachel finally spoke, barely above a whisper. Did you see the way he looked at me?" Jessica didn't turn. "He looked at you the way people look at a verdict." Rachel swallowed hard. The galley phone buzzed. Rachel jolted as if shocked. She picked it up with shaking fingers. It was the captain again. "Miss Dunning," he said, his voice sharp, cold, stripped of all earlier patience. "Security will be waiting at the gate when we land. You're to stay on board and provide a full account of your actions. Do not disembark. Do not speak to media. Understood?" Rachel's voice caught. "Yes, Captain." She hung up, her legs suddenly unsteady. Jessica watched her silently, her face a mix of disappointment and inevitability. "You didn't just mess up," Jessica said after a pause. "You messed up for all of us." Rachel didn't respond. In row 2, Marcus sipped from a glass of sparkling water. Adriana leaned back in her seat, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Caleb sat content, eyes locked on the clouds outside, humming quietly to himself. The serenity of the scene stood in stark contrast to the chaos Rachel had unleashed. "Do you think she understands what she did?" Adriana asked under her breath. Marcus shook his head, his voice low. "She doesn't. Not yet. But she will." As the plane began its descent into San Diego, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are in their upright positions. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." In the galley, Rachel stared at the floor. Her heart pounded louder than the engine's hum. Her palms were damp. She could feel the weight of every passenger's gaze, even through the walls. Jessica leaned in quietly. "They're not just passengers," she whispered. "They're the reckoning you invited on board." The landing was smooth. The familiar bump of the wheels touching down jolted the aircraft as usual, but for Rachel, it felt like a final sentence being delivered. As the plane taxied toward the gate, most passengers stood and began collecting their things. Marcus and his family remained seated. Calm. Collected. Still. Rachel forced a smile as she stood by the exit door. Her eyes flicked toward first class. The Whitmans hadn't moved. That silence, that stillness, it rattled her more than any confrontation could have. Then the galley phone buzzed. Rachel picked it up, praying it would be anything other than what she feared. But the captain's voice confirmed it: "Security is here. Executive Team 2. You're to stay on the aircraft. Cooperate fully. They'll conduct their interview on board." Rachel could barely breathe. "Understood," she croaked. Jessica stepped closer. "They're here, aren't they?" Rachel nodded weakly. "The executives. Security." Jessica gave a slow sigh. "Told you this wasn't over." Meanwhile, in first class, Adriana leaned over to Marcus, her voice barely audible. "What's the plan?" Marcus's eyes didn't leave the window. "We wait," he said simply. "Everything is already in motion." The passengers began disembarking, moving past the Whitmans, many stealing awkward glances or offering quiet words of support. One man, the same from earlier in the main cabin, paused beside Marcus's seat. "I'm sorry for what happened," he said, his voice firm but sincere. "It wasn't right." Marcus looked up, nodded once. "Thank you." The man nodded back and moved on. When only a few passengers remained on board, two uniformed security officers stepped into the aircraft. Their presence was impossible to miss. One turned toward Rachel immediately. "Miss Dunning?" he asked, his tone professional but firm. Rachel nodded, her voice nearly inaudible. "Yes. You'll need to remain on the plane. We've been asked to escort you to the galley for questioning." She followed them with slow, reluctant steps. As she passed row 2, Marcus looked up, not with anger, but with that same unsettling calm. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. As Rachel reached the galley, the officers gestured for her to sit. She obeyed, trembling slightly. The door to the aircraft closed behind the last passenger. And then the silence settled in again. In the terminal, the atmosphere had shifted. A group of airline executives stood near the gate, all in suits, all alert. One of them, a tall, gray-haired man in a charcoal jacket, stepped forward as Marcus and his family exited the jet bridge. "Mr. Whitman," he said immediately, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Hayes, Vice President of Operations. On behalf of Sierra West Airlines, I want to extend our deepest apologies." Marcus shook the man's hand, his face neutral. "This isn't just about us," he said calmly. "It's about the standards your airline claims to uphold, and how they've failed today." Robert swallowed, then nodded. "We're initiating a full review. We've suspended the flight attendant involved pending further investigation. And the CEO would like to meet with you personally if you're willing." Adriana stood tall beside her husband, Caleb in her arms. "We'll make time," she said. They turned toward baggage claim without another word, their departure as quiet and graceful as their arrival. Back on the plane, Rachel sat between two officers at a fold-down jump seat in the galley. Her voice trembled. "I didn't know who he was. I thought." One of the officers interrupted. "This isn't about who he is. It's about what you did." Rachel looked down at her lap, eyes brimming. For the first time, the gravity of what she had done, what she had set in motion, hit her like a tidal wave. And she knew, this was only the beginning. By the time Marcus, Adriana, and Caleb arrived home later that evening, the story had already broken. Headlines flooded every social media platform and news outlet. Primary airline shareholder removed from first class over appearance. Whitman family humiliated in cabin dispute, airline scrambles for damage control. A viral video, captured by a fellow first-class passenger, showed Marcus and his family being escorted back to coach. No shouting. No scene. Just the calm, collected composure of a man who knew exactly what power looked like and how it moved. Marcus sat in his study, scrolling through news coverage, his phone buzzing constantly with messages, emails, and calls from attorneys, reporters, and associates. The public sentiment was overwhelmingly in his favor. People were outraged, not just by what had happened to him but by what it represented. Stories poured in from strangers, passengers who had faced similar discrimination, people of color who had been questioned, belittled, or removed despite doing everything right. In the living room, Adriana watched a news panel debate the implications. "This isn't just about a seat," one anchor said firmly. "This is about implicit bias. About who we think belongs in luxury, and who we don't. And this time, they messed with the wrong man." She muted the television and turned to look at Caleb, who was quietly building a block tower on the rug. He had no idea the world was now watching his family. No idea the headlines, the corporate meetings, the CEO's panicked phone calls, were all because someone had questioned his place in a seat his parents had paid for. She envied his innocence. Meanwhile, back at Sierra West Airlines headquarters, the executive offices were in full crisis mode. Robert Lang, the CEO, stood at the head of a long glass conference table. Around him, department heads, public relations officials, and legal advisors scrambled to align a coordinated response. "This is bad," one executive muttered, flipping through a report of media analytics. "Social media's on fire. Hashtags trending globally. We're being tagged in every single bias-related thread. We've had PR issues before," another chimed in, "but this is different. This involves a stakeholder. A shareholder. He knows how this works and he's going to use every tool available." Robert raised a hand, silencing the room. His face was tight. "What's the status of the internal review?" "Preliminary interviews are done," replied a senior HR manager. "The flight attendant Rachel Dunning has been placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. Her actions clearly stemmed from personal bias, whether intentional or not." Robert's jaw clenched. "Suspension is not enough." One executive looked hesitant. "We've begun drafting an official apology. We're proposing mandatory sensitivity training across the airline. We've reached out to Mr. Whitman's team. He's agreed to a meeting." Robert nodded but didn't look relieved. "We'll meet. We'll apologize. But that won't satisfy him. He's not looking for an apology, he's going to demand reform." And Robert Lang knew, he was going to have to give it to him. At her apartment across town, Rachel Dunning sat frozen at her kitchen table. The glow of her laptop screen illuminated her pale face as she stared at the HR email she'd just received. "Due to your conduct during Flight 1643, and in light of the reputational harm incurred, your employment with Sierra West Airlines is hereby terminated, effective immediately. No appeal. No meeting. No warning. Just, over." She reread the email 3 times before the words registered. Rachel's phone buzzed with messages. Friends. Colleagues. Even strangers. Some offered support. Others called her out publicly, tagging her name under viral posts and calling her everything wrong with modern service culture. She didn't reply to any of them. Instead, she opened her inbox and began writing an email. Not to the airline. Not to the press. To the man she had wronged. To Marcus Whitman. Subject, my sincere apology. Dear Mr. Whitman, I want to extend my deepest and sincerest apology for my actions on Flight 1643. I now understand how my assumptions, my unconscious bias caused real harm to you and your family. My behavior was inexcusable. I acted without thought and allowed my perception to override my duty. I do not expect forgiveness. But I hope that you know I regret what I did, and I take full responsibility." She hit send. It was all she could do now. The following morning, Marcus arrived at Sierra West Airlines headquarters. The tall glass building gleamed in the early sun. His driver dropped him off near the revolving doors. Inside, an assistant greeted him with nervous politeness and escorted him upstairs to the executive conference suite. Robert Lang stood when Marcus entered, extending a hand. "Mr. Whitman," he said gravely. "Thank you for meeting with us." Marcus shook his hand but didn't return the pleasantry. "Let's get to it." Inside the room, a presentation had already been loaded onto a large screen. Robert walked Marcus through the proposed reforms: mandatory diversity training for all staff, a new third-party oversight committee, direct accountability measures, and incident review protocols. When Robert finished, Marcus remained seated, arms folded. "This is a start," he said slowly. "But let's not pretend this is just about one employee. This is about the culture of your company. And that doesn't change with PowerPoint slides." Robert swallowed. "We understand. We're prepared to issue a public statement today. Formal apology. Concrete steps." Marcus nodded. "Good. I want progress reports. I want independent audits. And I want data. Trends. Feedback. Implementation. And if I don't get them," he added with a sharp look, "I'll bring this to the board myself. I have the leverage. And I won't hesitate to use it." Robert nodded stiffly. "Understood." Marcus stood, buttoning his blazer. "This isn't personal, Mr. Lang. But it's going to be thorough." As he left the building, his phone buzzed with a message from Adriana. She had just seen the airline's public apology go live. Marcus opened the press release. "We deeply regret the incident involving Mr. Whitman and his family. This does not reflect the values of Sierra West Airlines. Effective immediately, we are initiating comprehensive reforms to ensure that no passenger is ever treated unfairly again." He closed the phone and slipped it into his pocket. A step in the right direction. But not the finish line. A month passed. At Sierra West Airlines, change was no longer a matter of press releases and staged apologies. It was daily policy. The reforms Marcus had demanded weren't just discussed, they were executed. Over 80% of staff had already completed Phase 1 of the newly launched sensitivity and bias training. An independent third-party review team had begun conducting interviews and compiling an audit of internal culture. Anonymous surveys filtered in by the hundreds, some revealing painful truths, others expressing relief that someone had finally forced the company to look inward. Marcus received the first formal progress report in his inbox at the start of the week. The cover letter was from CEO Robert Lang himself. "Your insistence on accountability has made us better. We're not done yet. But we've started. And that's because of you." He forwarded the email to Adriana with a brief note: "Step 1 complete. On to Step 2. Elsewhere, in a small corner cafe, Rachel Dunning sat by a window with a coffee she hadn't touched. Since her termination, she had taken deliberate steps toward reflection. She'd attended workshops on racial bias. Watched documentaries she once dismissed. Read testimonies from people who had lived with assumptions forced on them by others. Her apartment was quiet now, her life stripped of the career she had once wrapped her identity around. But there was something else blooming in uncomfortable but necessary awareness. She pulled out her phone, opened her inbox, and saw the reply. It was from the Whitman family. "Thank you for your apology. While it cannot undo the harm, we appreciate your recognition of it. Growth begins with accountability. We hope you continue to pursue it." Rachel read it 3 times. No anger. No gloating. Just truth. She closed her laptop, placed her hand on her chest, and breathed. Small steps. but forward. Back at the Whitman home, Caleb tugged on Marcus's hand as they walked through a private terminal at the San Diego airport. This time, they weren't flying commercial. Caleb held his toy airplane up toward the ceiling. "Are we flying again, Daddy?" Marcus smiled. "Yes, we are." Adriana walked beside them, serene, elegant as ever, though her eyes still scanned every face they passed, habit born from experience. The staff greeted them warmly, respectfully. But not excessively. Just, professionally. As they settled into their seats first class again, of course Adriana leaned toward Marcus. "Do you think they know who you are?" she asked softly, half teasing. Marcus chuckled, adjusting his watch. "Doesn't matter if they do," he said. "What matters is they're treating everyone the way they should." The plane lifted into the sky. Clouds drifted past the windows. And for the first time in weeks, there was peace. But Marcus knew, the work wasn't finished. Across the aviation industry, the story of what had happened on Flight 1643 sparked wide reform. Other airlines began conducting internal reviews. Major news outlets ran investigative segments about bias in customer service. Advocacy groups cited Marcus's actions as a turning point. And across social media, passengers, especially people of color, shared their stories with hashtags like #FlyFair and #AccountabilityMatters trending for days. One afternoon, Marcus received a notification. Sierra West had just published a public quarterly update on their bias training results and passenger treatment reforms. Transparency was now part of their brand identity because someone had made it unavoidable. He scrolled through the report, saw data points he had asked for. Graphs showing improvement. Statements of progress. At the end was a short quote from the CEO, "We thank those who hold us accountable. Without them, we cannot grow." He closed the report and walked outside. In the backyard, Adriana sat under a tree, watching Caleb play with his blocks in the grass. Sunlight hit her face just right, and Marcus paused, taking in the simplicity of the scene. She looked up. "Good news?" He nodded. "They're doing it. Slowly. But they're doing it." Adriana smiled faintly, then turned serious. "Do you think this changes anything long-term?" He looked at her, gaze steady. "Maybe not all at once. But every time we stand up, it makes it harder for the next injustice to go unnoticed." She walked toward him and slipped her hand into his. "Well, we're not done yet," she said. "No," Marcus agreed. "We're just getting started." Later that night, Caleb padded down the hallway, his toy airplane in hand. He peeked into the master bedroom where Marcus and Adriana sat talking softly. "Mommy? Daddy?" he asked, his voice curious. "Are people still mad about the airplane?" Marcus knelt down, scooped him into his arms. "Some are, buddy," he said gently. "But that's okay. They're speaking up because they want the world to be fairer. Are you fixing it?" "We're trying," Adriana said, brushing her hand across Caleb's curls. Caleb thought about that for a moment. "That's good," he said simply, then yawned. Marcus smiled. "That's the plan, little man." They tucked him in. "Read a story." Turned off the light. And as the night settled over their home, so did something deeper than peace. It was purpose. It was resolve. It was the quiet understanding that some flights change everything, not just where you land, but what you lift. Not everyone has the power that Marcus Whitman holds, the ability to make an entire system stop and listen. But thanks to people like him, calm in the storm, relentless in silence, the invisible cracks in our society finally come into the light. This story wasn't just about a seat in first class. It was about the quiet prejudices that still shape decisions, the assumptions hidden in uniforms, and the quiet harm done in the name of protocol. Marcus didn't just reclaim a seat for his family, he reclaimed dignity for every passenger who had been overlooked, questioned, or diminished simply because they didn't fit someone's expectations. And he did it not through outrage, but through preparation, truth, and the unwavering presence of justice. The lesson is simple: the quiet resistance of one principled person can speak louder than the silence of a million forgotten voices. You don't have to be a shareholder to make change. But you do need the courage to stand firm when something is wrong. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more real justice-driven narratives. Comment below: have you ever experienced something like this while traveling? Let's talk. Let's change. We'll see you in the next one.